And so welcome again to Making Marriage Fun. Just to pick up, this is more or less where we ended off last time, talking about the three loves. And as I mentioned, these are the three loves that are mentioned in, or the three Greek words that are used for love in the New Testament. I spoke about the fact that each of them has its own ingredients. So the cake of marriage consists of those three, and of in some cases, what I finished up saying is that when you're in a situation in your marriage where, unlike certain people in the room who are still in their honeymoon, where you get to the place where one or other of the layers of the cake become a little eroded, or the rats and mice get to them and they get eaten away. The thing to do is to pay attention to what is the baseline, the base layer that is there, what has been exposed. And as I said a few sessions ago, things like COVID, things like crises in our lives can very easily, they do one thing very effectively, and that is they expose what is there. They expose what dynamics are at play in our marriages. And that gives us this opportunity that we evaluate, and then we say, what do I need to do to start from where I am and rebuild? Or what do we, in the case of marriage, what do we need to be doing? And so in looking at these three loves, they are the three Greek words, as I said: agape, which is the word for unconditional acceptance and commitment toward an imperfect person. It's the word that is used obviously most often in the Bible. It's the word that is used to describe God's kind of love, a love that is accepting of the person even when you may disagree with what the person is doing. The second one is filial, which is a word that is used for brotherly affection, for friendship, the kind of love that exists between two close friends. We're going to be spending some time on that this evening. And the third one is eros, which is the love, the romantic love, which includes the sexual connection between a husband and a wife. And so for marriage to be enjoyable, for it to be fulfilling, and for it to be fun, it is important that we keep an eye on how are we doing with regard to expressing these loves toward one another. And tonight we're going to focus, as I mentioned, on the middle layer. So we spoke, just again as a matter of recap, we spoke in an earlier session about covenant, and that's the one that fully describes the idea of agape, that love where two people sacrificially commit themselves to the well-being, to act for the well-being of the other. And so we move on then to what is the basis of filial, of brotherly affection, of friendship. And the answer is communication. It is, as we said there in that past slide, adult to adult communication. So it's communication of a certain kind, and we're going to talk about what kind of communication that is this evening. As I'm speaking about this, I want you to be thinking about how you are doing in terms of this level of communication in your marriage. And by the way, it's a very interesting point that the most often quoted complaint in marriage is the absence or the lack of adequacy or of quality of this kind of communication within the marriage. So here's the deal about communication. We're communicating all the time. There is no such thing as not communicating. If you've ever had your partner not speak to you, I think you probably would agree that that's probably the most eloquent thing they ever said, when they decide to not speak to you. So communication is something that's going on all the time, whether it's going on between us and road signs, or between us and strangers, or between us and when we are angry, or when we are lonely, or when we are sad. Even when we're by ourselves, there is communication going on. We're talking to ourselves. There's self-talk. There is the processing of thoughts and emotions. All of those are involve an interaction between two polarities, two sides of any kind of conversation. We communicate by using words, which are verbal and written symbols that have common meaning to the two persons trying to communicate with one another. We communicate by using physical expression. And again, certain cultures have not only more physical things like hand gestures and so on than others, but in fact, very often in different cultures, the same gesture can mean different things. So I understand, for example, that in Nigeria, when people do this, they are greeting you. Whereas, of course, in the Western world, if somebody waves their fist at you, that's telling you you're in trouble. They're mad at you. The third kind of thing that we use to communicate is our facial expressions. And once again, also in different cultures, that can mean those can mean different things. And then finally, we use the environment to communicate. So when you invite someone to come to your office, for example, which my father-in-law did when I went over to his house to ask for Lorraine's hand in marriage, he said, "Come to my office." And there is a certain intimidation factor, which I'm sure was completely intentional on his part, when you invite someone to come to an office, as opposed to have a seat in the living room. Environment is by itself eloquent. So what is communication? In general, communication is making common to someone else what you possess. You can communicate both messages, you can communicate symbols, you can communicate through actions, and by doing that you make your feelings, thoughts, or possessions common to the other person. And so the aim of communication is building mutual understanding, letting someone understand you and seeking in turn to be understood by them. It has 4 basic components. Communication is a two-way process that involves these components. First of all, on the left-hand side, S, the person sending the message, the sender. And on the right-hand side, R, the receiver, the person receiving the message. Right in the center is M, the message itself. And of course, the medium very often is the message. That's why how we communicate that message, once again, contains meaning and will by itself convey something. And then the fourth element in communication or component is the feedback that completes the circle. And so as you see the arrows going here, the sender sends the message, the receiver receives the message, but communication is not complete at the point of reception. Communication is complete when the receiver sends back this thing called feedback that says, "I get you loud and clear. Sometimes I don't understand," or sometimes it says, "By that did you mean thus and so." And so again, communication is only complete when the circle is complete. The other thing to just bear in mind is, and this again comes back to young marriages particularly, is that each of the two participants in this communication, let's just restrict it to 2 people at this point within marriage, each of them has a code. You have learned a code by the way you've been raised, by the memories, by the way you have seen your parents communicate with each other. And so there is a code that is used by the person on one side. They encode the message, and then the person on the other side decodes the message. And so each one will apply their particular coding to understanding the message correctly or otherwise. The feedback, likewise, is conveyed through a code. And so feedback encodes, the receiver encodes the message, and the sender then has to decode it. And of course, there have been many very funny things. The basis of many jokes is, in fact, this very thing of people using different codes and therefore getting the wrong end of the stick. And that can become very funny, but it can also be, sometimes it can cause all kinds of difficulties in the conduct of a relationship. And so, very important. I learned this early on in our marriage. Very important to understand, what do you mean by, to ask the question, what do you mean by that word? I speak in my book about the fact that early on in our marriage, Lorraine used the word attractive about another man. And for me, that was like the end of our marriage. I went into a complete depression, thinking that what she meant was that she found that guy more attractive than me, and that, she's going after him now. And only to discover that her meaning was not as literal as mine in using that particular word. So we have many things like that, and it's very often an important thing to stop and ask the question, what do you mean by that word that you are using? So the message is, in terms of these components of communication, the message itself is something that is made up of, first of all, the actual words. Second of all, the tone of voice. When it's verbal communication, the tone of voice that is used. And by the way, I think you're all aware of this by now, but things like text and things like email don't have a tone of voice. And so it's very important for you, once again, before you jump to conclusions about what someone is saying, it's very important to stop and listen for the straightforward meaning of the message, rather than any implied tone of voice that is not there. Thirdly, non-verbal cues, and these are a whole bunch of things like facial expressions, which we've mentioned, like body posture or body language, gestures, etc., and then also actions. And so a person's actions, there's an old proverb that says, or axiom that says, a person's actions speak louder than their words, and that is true. The fact is that we can contradict with our actions what we're saying with our words, and our actions will be the ones that win in terms of what message is understood or received. So in order to really communicate well, we need to make sure that the three components are complementary in the constructing of our messages. Here's an interesting point. When it comes to conveying a message, only 7% of the meaning of the message is conveyed by the words themselves. Second of all, 38% of the meaning of the message is conveyed by the tone of voice. And thirdly, 55% is conveyed by non-verbal cues, facial expressions, body posture, and actions. And so if there's any kind of dissonance, guess which one wins? It's usually, in any fight, it's the big guy that wins, right? Unless he's from a distance and he has a high velocity sniper rifle. But that's a totally different question in terms of communication. But 55% is always going to, and when you add to that tone of voice, is always going to beat 7. And so the words themselves can become lost in things like our attitude, our tone of voice, and our nonverbal cues. I read this very good statement again yesterday. It says, people will forget what you said, and they will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And so those things, like the smile on your face, the touch, your ability to embrace and to show genuine acceptance and affection toward another person, is far more important very often than constructing the words in the exact way that you want. So then we come to the different, in terms of the components of a communication. Let's look at the sender and the receiver. The sender is, first of all, a person that needs to pay attention to what you want to convey, and particularly to assume responsibility, intelligent and emotional responsibility for your statements. When we communicate in veiled ways, like we talk about how, people use this expression, they say, and I just used it now twice in a short piece of a sentence. But saying they say is a veiled way of evading responsibility for what I'm just about to the opinion I'm just about to give you. And so it's important for us especially when things have emotional significance, when a message you're trying to convey, when a communication has emotional significance, it's really important to think in terms of, what do I really feel, and what do I want this person to hear when I speak next. And so use I messages, use sentences that start with the personal pronoun I, not they or we even, which is another veiled way of avoiding responsibility. Avoid generalizations. One of the things that very often happens in marriages is that people get to a point where they generalize how a person acts in certain ways, and so they'll say words like "you always" or "you never," and both of those are not only generalizations, which is by itself wrong, but second of all, they are usually what they will do is they will block the person's ears. They won't open their ears. As soon as you say to me something like "you always," what I start doing right away is I go on the defensive, and I try to remember the times that I haven't done what you say I always do. And so that blocks communication. That doesn't open it up. And so I'm sure all of us can think of occasions when we do that. Generalizations close communication down. They don't open it up. Always use positive language before you use negative language. In other words, affirm before you criticize, and then ask these questions. Is it kind? Is it necessary? Is it true? Is it helpful? Very often we think our way into a communication, and we think out loud. We don't consider beforehand whether this is in fact going to be helpful to me understanding and being understood, especially at an emotional level. And remember, again, in this matter of being the sender, pay attention to the other thing, the non-verbal cues. Pay attention to your body language. Pay attention to, is this the right environment in which I should be talking about this particular subject or raising this particular issue? When someone has been overwhelmed with a lot of things to do in a day, they're busy, they're kind of flustered, they're going between tasks, is not the time to raise the fact that they weren't very attentive this morning, or they've been so busy that they haven't given you enough quality time, etc. So wait until the right environment, or create the right environment, before you miscommunicate because you're speaking in a wrong or a not conducive environment. And so the sender needs to assume responsibility. A friend of mine used to say that where there is misunderstanding, the responsibility for misunderstanding lies in the hands of the communicator. where your communication is not understood correctly, rewind, ask questions, say, if I didn't make myself clear, let me try and reword that. And particularly pay attention to what emotion are you trying to get across to this person. And then, and remember WYSIWYG. We talked last time about WYSIWYG, which stands for what you see is what you get. That carries meaning in a number of ways. The person is looking at me, the person is watching my body language, the person is seeing my facial expressions. Sometimes I can't see my facial, in fact I never can see my facial expressions unless I'm looking in a mirror. And so it's important to stop and say, what are they seeing? What are they getting? Because what they see is what they're getting. And so be aware of yourself and kind of dial down, calm down, recover your sense of poise. As Paul says, when you're going to fight nicely. Fight without sin. Fight without taking it out on the person. Play the ball and not the man or the woman, as the case may be. So I want us to pause here for a moment, and we'll give you a few minutes like we did last time to talk about, and what I want you to do is to ask one another, how am I doing most of the time as a sender? What am I doing well? Ask them what positives are there about your role as a sender in communication, and is there anything that you can do to improve? Ask them those two questions and ask them both ways, and let's just take a few minutes to sharpen up our skills as communicators. Okay, I think we're going to move right on to the receiver is the other person in the exchange. And the receiver is just what the word says, a center that receives a communication, that has antennae that pick up what is being spoken. And the way we usually do that is by listening. I think it was Erik Erikson, who said, probably one of the greatest acts of love we can show another human being is to listen to them. Over and over again in counseling over years, I've heard this complaint that one person or another in a relationship will say, I don't feel heard. I never felt heard by him or her. And so hearing is something that looks at a person and says, I hear you, and not only what you say matters, but who you are matters. You matter. And we say that to one another through the act of listening. When it comes to listening, it's not just paying attention to the words only. It's not hearing, but it is paying attention. It is connecting with the person's words and the meaning that they are trying to convey through those words. It is not just thinking about what you're going to say when they stop speaking, which again is a common phenomenon. And the way in which you can ensure or slow yourself down enough to hear properly, to listen properly, is by asking, first of all, by repeating back to them what you have heard. Just getting used to using phrases like, what I'm hearing you say is, and give what you've heard back to them so that they can do one of two things. They can say, oh wow, thank you, he really listened. Or they can say, no, you misunderstood. That's not what I meant. And so before we go off on reacting to misunderstanding and mishearing, it's a good idea to use that little pause, a little moment to say, let me tell you what I heard you saying, and convey that to them. So listening is the act that says, I accept you, and I even accept what you're saying, even if I don't agree with it. Ours is not to judge the person and even their words. Our job is to receive those words, and in some cases to simply say, thank you, I understand. Again, that is something that we sometimes have to clarify. I've had this very often in other kinds of settings of listening to someone where they are either complaining or they are making statements about something that is out there. I might say, I might be nodding, I might be saying, so what I hear you saying is thus and so. And very often people, maybe it's because they haven't had that done as often as they need to, but very often people will confuse acceptance with agreement. And they will think, well, what happened is that I agreed with them. And sometimes you need to even make that distinction and say, I don't necessarily agree with what you're saying, but I'm here to hear you and to give you all of the attention that you deserve. Winston Churchill said, I disagree with what you are saying, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. And so what we are doing as good listeners is we are demonstrating a thing called empathy, from two Greek words, en pathos, which means to feel in the person, to literally get into their being, to get into their body, so to speak. To do as the Native American person said many years ago, do not judge a man until you have walked 2 moons in his moccasins. We get into the moccasins of another person by listening well. And empathy, I think many of you may have read the books already, but empathy is the most important mark of a thing called emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence means that you don't only understand what a person is saying, but you understand the feelings, you understand the emotion that is involved in them saying it. And that brings me to the center of this whole thing about communication. And it goes back to a book that was written in the 1960s by a man called John Powell. He wrote a book called Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am? And in that book he describes these 5 levels of communication. And this is the kind of core and center of everything that I understand and believe intimacy to be and to mean, especially within a marriage. So Powell said that there are these 5 levels of communication. The first level is what he called cliches, the exchanging of cliches. And so cliches might be those habitual greetings that we have. Hi, how are you? I'm fine, thank you. How are you? I'm fine, thank you. That is something that we will say to many people, especially when there's no lockdown. We will say to many people, we'll even say to people when we're riding an elevator. We'll say it to the person next to us on the next treadmill at the gym. We'll say it to perfect strangers on a bus journey. And so we will communicate at that level. And by the way, there is not a lot of meaning being conveyed. That's why it's called cliche communication. We do it with many people, but the meaning level is very low. So I don't really mean to ask you, so how are you doing, when I'm exchanging cliches at that level. And very often we will even be offended if a person answers us, instead of with another cliche, they'll answer us with, well, actually, now that you ask, let me tell you about my liver complaint or my gallbladder operation or whatever. We really are not that interested, and so therefore that's a bit inappropriate to get to that level before you really have gone through the others. The second level of communication is reporting facts, and that's usually about other people, someone removed from me, someone like a colleague at work, someone that we may know, an acquaintance, etc. Or it can be something even more remote, like what I saw on television, or what the president said in his last fireside chat that he had with the country. Did you hear what the president said, etc., etc.? You're reporting facts, and that has a little more meaning, and is also exchanged with fewer people. That's where you're talking to acquaintances. It might be at a sports club. It might be at work. It might be in a larger kind of gathering where you are exchanging information. It's what we call small talk, but it's a little more meaningful than cliches. The third level is the exchange of beliefs and opinions. So now you're not just talking about what the president said, but you're giving your opinion about what he said. You'll say, and I think. That's an opinion word. I think. Or you may use a belief word. I believe. Or it makes me angry, or whatever. It makes me feel, it makes me think, thus and so. So beliefs and opinions are exchanged, and that is the beginning of what we call self-disclosure. That is taking something that is in me. It's not about others. It's not even facts that are in general circulation. Now it's taking something in me and it is making it common to someone else. It's saying, I think. Out of my brain comes a thought, and I make it known, make it common to you as well as to myself. So that is the beginning of self-disclosure. Keep that in mind as we move on. The fourth level is sharing of feelings and responses. And so here is where we start to use feeling words. We say, I feel, and the next word is a feeling word, like angry, sad, upset, frustrated, insecure, fearful, anxious, etc., etc. All of those are feeling words. And when we are doing that, we're going even deeper into the well of our own world of meaning, and we are making it common to someone else. So we are entrusting something that is usually quite private and usually quite close, carefully hidden. And we're making it, we feel safe enough with this person to tell them how we feel about something. And then we come to the fifth level, which is what Powell called peak communication. Absolute openness and honesty. If I feel something, I will reveal that in everything, my body language included. So, for example, if I'm feeling sad, I might weep. If I'm feeling a great feeling of love, I might touch or embrace the person. If I'm feeling angry, I might shout and go red in the face. If I'm feeling joyful, I can maybe jump on the table and dance a jig when I was a whole lot younger. And so all of these are ways in which we do a thing called emoting. We emote without having to edit, without having to think about what I'm doing. And we feel, again, safe enough to be able to do that. Now, this is the important thing to understand about all of these levels. And this is all comes out in Powell's book. The first thing he said is 95% of all communication, including within marriages, happens at levels 1 and 2. We spend most of our time, even when we are communicating, talking cliches or reporting facts about others. In many marriages, the subject is the children, or the subject is something that you heard from one of the children about one of their friends' mothers. The second thing to understand about communication is that level 3 communication is where we cross what we call the intimacy line. As I said earlier, when I let you see into even my thoughts and beliefs, my opinions and beliefs, I'm letting you see into me. Into me see is beginning to happen. But really important is to understand levels 4 and 5 are where we really build intimacy between us and another person. And the thing to understand here is that when we're operating, when we're speaking, communicating at levels 4 and 5, there is if it goes two ways, there is automatic intimacy being built between those two people. And so it's something that tells you about both from the positive and the negative side within marriages. Why this kind of communication is so important. Because it does lead to a fulfilling connection between you that makes the outward expression of intimacy, for example, in our sexual relationship, it makes it that much, it gives it meaning when it is being led up to by the sharing of hearts. And it is also the number one reason why people, as I said earlier, why marriages fail, is because people say, my partner doesn't share his or her heart with me. They don't tell me how they are feeling, and they don't receive what I'm feeling. And so we're operating very much at the level of companions, but not as intimate life partners. So let me give you one last little thing that's not in the notes, but it is a thing called the Johari or Johari window. And it sounds very exotic, that name Johari or Johari. And it actually was derived from the two names, Joe and Harry, which were two guys who were studying this matter of communication. And the window goes like this. It says, there are parts of me that are known to me and known to others. There are parts of me that are known to me and unknown to others. There are parts of me that are known to others and unknown to me. And then there are parts of me that are unknown to both, unknown to me and unknown to others. So what they called these parts, aspects of self, were these. They said there was the public self, the you that you present in the world out there. Second of all, there's the private self. That's the inner you that is known to you but unknown to others. Thirdly, there is the blind self. That is the you that only others see and you don't see yourself. It is known to others but unknown to me. And finally, there is the potential self. It's the you that is not yet discovered, that you haven't even discovered yet. The you that you can become. And here's the beautiful thing. The mechanisms by which we grow into the two aspects of growth are, first of all, through disclosure. Disclosing what I have within me to someone else takes what is known to me and makes it known to others. Second of all, there is feedback, which is where people see me and they say what they see. And so what is known to others moves into the realm that was previously unknown to me and makes it known to me. And you can see by the dotted lines there that a certain thing is happening as a result of that. That the thing that is happening is growth, self-awareness growth. And so that particular little corner over there, that is, as a result of that conversation, I have discovered something about myself. I actually grow into that potential self. I become a little more of the person that I'm supposed to become. And I do that through trusted and trusting self-disclosure and receiving feedback from people that I feel safe with. It is the key to healing and growth, as I pointed out last time in the previous session. And so we come finally to what are the areas in which we should be communicating. And I think about these as the area of goals and planning, the area of doing business, and the area of conflict resolution. First of all, understanding goals. A good goal needs to be SMART. I have my own version of SMART, so don't run ahead of me here. What I mean when I say SMART is S stands for stretching. A goal needs to be something that takes me beyond what I can easily do with my eyes closed currently. I need to go into a realm of what I haven't tried before. Second of all, it should be measurable. It needs to be something that I can actually measure progress toward and measure when I have got there. Thirdly, it needs to be attainable or realistic. Fourthly, it needs to be recorded, by which I mean write it down. Don't trust just having it in your mind, but write it down. And lastly, it needs to be time related. It needs to be contained within a time frame that I say I'm going to do that by such and such a date or time. The difference between a goal and a dream, of course, is that a goal includes a plan of action for achievement. And so all of those to sum up this very powerful subject of goal setting. Couples in marriage will grow in their marriage and will grow in their understanding of themselves and of one another by the constant, continual practice of setting and achieving goals for themselves. And those don't have to be goals, material goals. They can be goals like building friendship, building a new friendship every 3 months, or it can be goals about spiritual growth, or it can be goals about ways in which we can impact our community. Together goals is what we're talking about here. And so you as an individual person need to have your goals, his goals, and her goals, and you also need to build a togetherness by having couple goals. Amos said, "How shall two walk together unless they are agreed?" And by that he meant not just agreed on the basic philosophy of life, but agreed on destination, agreed on what goal we're going to accomplish in our lives. And so be consistent in a practice of setting and achieving goals within your marriage. And this is the shape of a goal, and it is something that gives you the platform from which you can engage in positive communication. You can engage in meaningful prayer for one another by asking how things are going toward the accomplishment of your goals. So goals start with a thing called dreams. And when we dream, we are engaging our imagination. We are talking about desires. The lovely text in Psalm 37 and the whole of Psalm 37 is a good thing to read and remember over and over again when it comes to accomplishment in our lives, because he said, "The Lord, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. He will give you dreams to dream. He will give you things to imagine as possible." We start on our road toward those dreams. They don't all necessarily become goals, but they stimulate goals. They trigger the ability to work toward a different future. We start from where we are. And then we take the dreams and we crystallize them, we condense them into goals that are SMART. All of those things that I said about SMART a moment ago. And then the journey is designed, and the journey is broken down. It's not a thing we accomplish in a single leap, but it's broken down into action steps. And those action steps can be once a week, once a day, once a month, once a year. And if it's a year, we break that down into monthly sub-goals, etc. And then the path to success begins. And the way we do that is by taking daily steps toward the accomplishment of the big goal on the way to the fulfillment of the dream. And so again, in marriage, if we, instead of just having that person on the stairway to success, we have a couple on their own stairway. The two walk together on the basis that they have agreed. And so it is in this context that we can take time, and I encourage couples to do this at least once a week, to sit down and say, so how did our week go? What do we want to see happen next week? What are some of the things that are in our individual diaries? What things do we need to collate and to synchronize watches about? What are some ways in which I can be praying for you to accomplish the things that are important to you? What are the things that we are going to be focused toward, we're going to be committing time, energy, and money toward, we are going to be building? It makes for enjoyable conversations. When we're talking our dreams, we are actually lifting one another's spirits. Dreams are inspiring things. Vision is a thing that inspires a sense of hope and of expectation, of positive expectation of a preferable future. By the shared goals, we are building togetherness. Every time we accomplish it, it's a bit like teams. When a team goes onto a field and they accomplish a goal together, there is a togetherness that happens. We share the win, and therefore we share the feeling of it. We share the enjoyment and the encouragement of it. It builds us together by the sharing of the goals. It also means that we become future-focused people. I think a lot of the time in our lives we are stuck in reality to the point, and of course COVID hasn't done us any favors from that point of view, that we can become so present bound that we forget to be future focused. And so planning ahead is a vital part of you recovering everything about your humanity that God intended for you to have. It has to do with quality and quantity time, spending that kind of time together. And finally, it has to do with serving one another's full potential by calling it out, by encouraging one another along the way. And so this is a vital part of the friendship aspect of marriage. In your notes, you have some worksheets that I want to encourage you to make copies of and use in order to stop and think about what you want to accomplish, what goals you want to set, and ways in which you can embark on some of those. Compare notes. Hold yourself accountable to one another for some of those goals. That's a very good way to build your confidence, is by being accountable and remembering the little wins on the way to the overall success of the big picture of your life. And so it's in this way that we build friendship. Friends are people who are on a journey to the same goal together. Friends are people who share interests and values and things that excite and things that they're concerned about and things to exercise their faith toward. And so married couples need to be not only committed to one another, they also need to build a friendship that, by the way, takes up between 85 and 90% of your time together. I know that for those of you who are newlyweds, you don't believe this, but it's true that most of the time that is given to a marriage is not given to time in the bedroom, but it is given to time living life and sharing this journey of growth toward ultimate success. Because your individual success makes of you two adults who are inspiring, who are confident, and who are able to lift one another. When one falls down, the other can lift him up. And then, of course, always brings into it the element of faith, the element of hope, the element of a God who said, when there are two strands in the cord, it could still be broken, but a three-stranded cord is not easily broken. So, thank you for listening, and take some time to analyze your lives in terms of those areas of life that you need to give attention to, and then to start planning. Even if some of those plans are COVID allowing, we will do thus and so God willing, we will do thus and so. We will go here and there. We will buy land and we will build and we will make a life. So, God bless you as you communicate better with one another than ever before.